Greetings everyone. Before we sit down with today's brilliant guest for another inspiring and informative interview on the issues of the day, I just want to give you another reminder to go and check out my patreon.com site. I must insist, by signing up to my patreon.com site, you show your support in a meaningful way, support for this channel, and quid pro quo, you become a member of the family. You get early access to new content and an exclusive question and answer session every week. It's a great site. I honestly think so. So get along there, join up, and help make it even better by stirring yourself into the mix. Okay, now it's time for that interview. Greetings, fellow time travellers. It's time for another conversation with a guest who will, I am quite confident, give us a fresh perspective on the world around us, which is what we want. Alex Story is today's guest. Alex is a former Olympic rower for Team GB. Also, he has been a sometime prospective parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Alex and I became aware of one another's existence and then met in the real world as well as the virtual world in relatively recent times. Now, I'm always interested to know how others arrived at this place of questioning and fresh understanding of so many things. I talk on here often about what happened to me, but I think it'd be useful. Alex Story, good morning. If we begin by hearing how you came to be at that point where we suddenly entered conversation with one another.
Yeah, so I left my home, my parents behind when I was 17, and my desire, my hope, and my ambitions really were to go to the Olympic Games and to represent my country at the highest level. And the feeling really was I grew up in Fontainebleau in France because my father was an academic at a business school called INSEAD. And I'd spoken to the headmaster of that state school I went to called François Premier. And the headmaster was very French, very statist. And he said, Monsieur Story, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I want to go to the Olympic Games. I want to play music and I want to go to a good university. And he said, Monsieur Story, this is impossible. If you want to play music, you go to music school. If you do sport, you go to sport school. And if you do good universities, you do maths and physics. And so that was the first time I was confronted with the state saying, no, you cannot do what you want to do. You have to do things through the channels that we've aligned for you, whether you like it or not. That year, by coincidence, really, I qualified for the junior world championships that took part in Montreal in Canada with a big stay in the US. And when I joined the national team, I met a lot of really big characters, and I absolutely love these people, all of them forward looking, all of them 17 and full of beans. They wanted to conquer the world. And I just fell in love with these characters. And it was very different from the French schooling system where people are taught within the system to be negative and to be covetous and to want to act as brakes for others. Whereas there, when I arrived in this new world, everything was positive. The characters were big and the ambitions were even greater. And so after a few months, I decided to stay in the UK, and I went to Henley College. And the headmaster asked me a similar question. He said, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And I said, well, I'd like to go to the Olympic Games. I'd like to play music, and I'd like to go to Oxford and Cambridge. And he said, this is great. So my perspective on Britain was, this is the land of the free. And whatever it is that led Britain to this place needs to be preserved. And so my view was very different from what I was hearing in the press, because a lot of people were tired with the Conservative administration. Some people want to change. But for me, from my perspective, with completely fresh eyes, it was a great country and it needed to be protected. And that's the reason why, from sports, I decided to represent my people in Parliament. That was the quixotic youngster's view of things, because I thought that that's what you did. You went to the games, you represented your people, and you did the same thing with the same amount of dedication in politics. It took me a while to realize, though, that sports and politics are not the same. But sports, in particular rowing, there is no money. It's all about glory and pushing yourself through unbelievable levels of pain. And it's all through dedication that you do it. So you tend to be an honest man when you row, because the only thing that you get is a fleeting bit of glory, perhaps in the shape of a medal or some kind of writing on someone's wall. And in politics, the words don't matter, don't mean anything. They're malleable, they're fungible. A commitment is not worth anything, and a manifesto pledge is worth even less. So that was my journey from sports into politics, and the beginning of the journey towards meeting Neil on the other side, a decade and a half later.
That's fascinating, Alex, that you talk about. I suppose one might almost expect it, but that your experience of sport, and certainly high-level sport, was of a fundamental honesty, and that and a man's word was his bond, so to speak. And it was all about the moment and authenticity. And then you wanted to take that into politics, and to use politics to conserve that climate, that atmosphere that had made your sport possible. And then, and yet within the Conservative Party, you were let down with at that basic requirement of trust and honesty.
Well, and of course the irony. I mean, the way to explain the character of a rower is quite important, because a rower goes to bed very early, wakes up very early, trains an inordinate amount of time, and has about 8 hours to do other things. And so if you want to do things, you've got to be very well organized. But I never, or very rarely, saw the inside of a pub after 10 p.m. So my view of the fairer sex was always beautiful, because I always remember these beautiful girls walking in, and by 10 o'clock I had to leave. So my memory of life was completely unreal in a way, and it was But that's the life I led, and I'm very grateful for it. But it's also one where you know that nothing's given to you and everything's worked for, and it makes you honest as well, because you're dependent on other people who have to do the same thing in order to reach the goals that you want to reach. And it's pointless to try and cheat in sports, right? Because where you can take drugs if you want to, but you know that if you do that everything is ephemeral. Your victory will be snatched away from you in 4 or 8 years' time, and you'll become persona non grata in your entire sporting field. So your community will disappear. So I grew up as in my early 20s without a radar for danger. The danger was always the Russian on the other side of the line, or the American, or the German crews against whom I raced, or before we qualified, with my own teammates, because I had to compete against them as well. In politics, ironically, the first person I did meet was Chris Pincher. When I joined, I decided to launch myself into politics in 2001, and I went to central office. And then a few years later, he did what he did in one of the clubs in Pall Mall, and then brought Boris Johnson down. And it's the way that the story kind of comes together. But it's interesting that it was my first encounter in politics, and my last one in a way. But you can't write these things.
And so because of all of that, because of your experience of sport and the honesty of it, and the rewards that straightforward dedication brought, and this shared experience of being able to rely on teammates and all of the rest of it, so positive. And then it's almost like a parable that you hoped in your youth to take that into politics, and you'd in expectation of the same results for the same kind of honesty and dedication, and yet your experience was so other.
Exactly, and so ironically, I thought that these attributes of dedication, of not lying, of trying to serve the membership and the voters as best you could would be the most praised part of your professional career in politics. And so it's not because of Pincher that I decided to, my strategy was to try and avoid central office, because I always, when I went into central office, I thought, I don't want to be one of these people here, pasty, relatively ill-looking, with very strange views of the world, because it was all spreadsheets and surveys and polls and everything else. My view was, because I believed the hype, and that's the important point, and that's where you and I think, will connect very much more as we go on. I believed the big print, and I completely forgot the small print. And the big print was, the membership matters, the electorate matters. You go out and you kind of get the experience in a difficult seat for a Conservative Party parliamentary candidate. You know, it would have been Salford or Denton and Redditch, which is where I went, and then Wakefield, which was in West Yorkshire and had been Labour for 60, 70 years. But actually, in the process of this strategy of going to the membership and going to the people also changed me completely, because I thought, I love these people on whose doors I'm knocking, because I know nothing. And I thought I had a bag of knowledge because I went to a good university and because I read a lot and everything else. But actually, the more doors I knocked, the more I realized that I didn't know anything. And I really, really, in particular, my time in Wakefield was 3 years where I think I spoke to about 23,000 people. So I felt like Peter the Hermit, spreading the good news on doorsteps. But I really loved that part of the political process, which was the honest way of being, which is, this is me, these are my views, what are yours? And this was the constant exchange. And the more you spoke to people, the more you realize that actually people in Britain are, in the main, very good people. They're not envious. They're not covetous. They more or less want fairness, and fairness in treatment from the police, from on the educational side or whatever it is. But actually, the recipe for a sane society is fairness, right? And I just came out of this thinking, the more doors I knocked, the more I realized that party politics was something completely different. And it wasn't designed for me to sample the views of the people of Wakefield to try and express them in Westminster. It was really Westminster dictating to me and to other parliamentary candidates what ought to be said to people on the streets. And that was also something that I also stumbled on, in particular when David Cameron came along. I was too young and too fresh to be able to be fair about what William Hague did, but that was my impression. The more I spent time with people, the less I thought the party system was the way to represent them.
From a completely different direction, and for all manner of other reasons, I have come to the conclusion that one of the fundamental problems that we have in this country is the party system itself. Whatever it was 150 odd years ago when that system crystallized, and at that moment it went, the politics went away from the sovereign individual honestly applying his or her own conscience and making decisions for the benefit of his or her constituency. And they became instead dependent upon and subservient to the party of which they were a member. And it was what the party wanted that mattered, because what the party wanted was to get into power, and when in power, to remain in power. And all other considerations, the needs and wants of the electorate, were secondary to that. And I've arrived at that conclusion in my own way. But you've come at it. You've arrived from within the machine itself.
Yeah.
You've seen and experienced at first hand that corrupted system. How can that system possibly represent the people? It can't.
And for me, I do feel that we kind of live in the era of revelation, where things are just too big to be ignored, and technology enables people who are feeling that something's not quite right to communicate with one another. So I think this communication, this ability for us to communicate, is one of the reasons why we might look back to 150 years and think that the political party system was the beginning of power-seeking individuals through the institution of political parties. I think what we can agree on is that human beings have never been better or have never been worse than what they were, than when they are today and what they were 1,000 years ago. I think we are constrained by our humanity with all the sins that we've inherited and all the good things that we've also inherited. And it's a constant struggle. What makes the difference now is that technology enables the people who have this Tower of Babel insane view that everything should be centralized, much more likely, much more able to bring all the power to the center. And so our struggle is to try and make sure that we decentralize as much as we can the social networks. We've got to resist as much as we possibly can this antediluvian desire to become God, which is why the Tower of Babel story, although very short, is so meaningful, I think, in the Bible. But the reason why I'm saying the era of revelation is like every good film, there is an arc of discovery for the protagonist. And for me, the biggest one was when I stood for the European Parliament in Yorkshire. And the returning officer comes back with a document saying, are you willing and able to be the MEP, the member of the European Parliament for Yorkshire? Here's the document. You just need to sign this, say you're willing and able, and Bob's your uncle. You'll be representing the good people of Yorkshire in the European Parliament. And I was obviously very proud of it. And then the next day I get a phone call from central office from a supposed friend who tells me, we've given your seat to somebody else on technical reasons. And so
wait a minute. You had won the election, pure and simple. You had achieved the magical figure that meant that you were by any logic, you were the elected representative. But that still wasn't enough.
I came top of the list through the membership, and I was top of the list. We had one elected MEP, a guy called Tim. I forgot his name now. Lord Tim, of course, he's Lord now, and he stood down. And of course, I was then, we got the election going in 2014. The votes were what they were, so only one MEP was returned. And by right, the second person who was top of the list would get there, right? So there's an election process. I get an X amount of thousands of votes. I get the returning officer, give me the letter, this is your seat. And the Tory party decides that, no, that's not who is going to win this or get the seat. It's going to be the guy that you've beat across all the hustings for a whole year. And I thought to myself, wow, it's an enormous amount of effort to go through in a relatively meaningless position, because the MEP position for, it's the European Parliament is like a Duma or a Chinese Communist Party People's Assembly. It doesn't have really any power. It can't veto European Commission regulations and laws. It can tinker with them, but it can't do very much more than that. But still, it was a position that I'd won fairly and squarely. And then you'd think, well, why would a party go through all the trouble of lying to its members, lying to its representatives, placing in a position, in an elected office, somebody who wasn't chosen who got 0 votes from the members and 0 votes from the public into an elected office? So that's the first awakening call, right? The second one, of course, was the way that the British establishment completely lost its marbles over Brexit. That for me was unbelievable, because it struck me as the least well-educated on Europe are the ones that are shouting the loudest about the EU. And I say this because I grew up in France. My father's English, my mother's Austrian, my wife is German. I have a vast Spanish and Italian Catholic family that, peoples Southern Europe. And the beauty of Europe is its cultural diversity, its languages, its various the architectures, its histories, and the destruction of Europe is coming through this desire once again to centralize. And we're dealing with a group of people who are so parochial in a way, who are incurious about different cultures and who want to simplify everything. But these people are in power, and these people do not have your interest or my interest at heart. They have the interest of their vision, regardless of what the consequences are. And you and I and the people of Britain are essentially just the collateral damage that their theories impose on all of us.
That was also you talk about the age of revelation. I, as someone who had been a lifelong, political atheist, I did not engage with politics instinctively. It was just a background for me. But post Brexit, I could not believe what happened. Yeah. I had this naive idea that if you held a plebiscite, if you held a referendum, and there was a decision made, if there was a majority achieved, then that's what would happen. That would be the choice. And the extent to which all of the machinery of power went into gear to pretend as though the referendum had not happened, or had been some kind of a mistake, that was a great revelation for me.
Yeah,
and it's interesting to hear you talk about your MEP experience, where you'd come from the rowing background, where if you came across the tape first, then you got the medal. It's a straightforward transaction. But you went through the MEP thing. You went through first, as it were, and then the medal was taken away waved in front of your face, and then handed to
somebody else.
Somebody else.
But also, the process there was extremely costly. Right? It was 1 year of primaries, a whole year. And Yorkshire is not just a very beautiful county; it's also very big. So you have to go from town to town and speak to people, which is fine, which is what really politics ought to be about. But it's only worth something if you can sample people's views and do something about them in a positive way. But for me, what happened after Brexit was exactly what you described, which is this was one, not fair, not square. We know that the establishment poured huge amounts of cash on the Remain side of the argument. But suddenly it became about the red bus and the lie. And I know because I was part of the campaign initially, and I know where the data comes from. It was from the Office of National Statistics that said that £350 million a week were going to the EU. Now that's the gross figure, but for every pound that we sent to the EU, we got 49p back. So we were contributing much more than we were receiving. But there was no lie. And of course, the point would have been, hang on, if your entire argument lost because of a red bus and the wrong number on a bus, what were you selling? What was, but there's been no introspection. There was never a sense where these people said, perhaps we missold it. Perhaps the way that we went about it was wrong. There was no introspection at all. And that's, this is what we see with increasing, regularity. And of course, then COVID hit and things like that. And you just go, my God, I can't believe it. It's the same process over and over again. So you pick on a small number of people or the majority of people, you repeat ad nauseum that they are bad people, that they're stupid, that we hope that they die soon, because that's really what happened after Brexit. But during COVID, it became the anti-vaxxers and everything else. And then suddenly you realize that the state is trying to find a minority of plausible characters on which it pours its hatred in order to justify whatever else it's doing. And so that for me was part of the reasons why I think you and I and people like George Galloway and others just went, hang on, there's a much, much bigger story here. There's something big going on. We keep being told by people who lie constantly that we are the liars. We keep being taught by people who are full of hatred that we are hateful. And then you think, my God, this is actually quite a serious moment in our history where these people do not want constraints, and they see you, me, our past, our cultures, our religions, and everything else as the constraints that need to be done away with.
It's no wonder, is it, that so many of us have come to the conclusion that we're dealing with a uniparty. After a lifetime in which I thought there was a clear difference between the left and the right of politics, manifest in the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. You know, I appreciate there are other political parties, but having grown up believing that, it was again such a revelation to finally understand that all political parties, it would appear, just want to centralise control. They'll say anything, do anything, invite people to believe anything. But in reality, all that any of the party machines are doing is seeking to take all decision-making, all policy-making, all control into the centre of their web and treat the people with contempt.
Yeah, I think the first time I came across this contempt was reading about the demise of the grammar school, and Tony Crossland, the Minister for Education in the late 60s, who is on record as saying, I want to destroy every effing grammar school in Britain. And the reason for this is that a kid from a solid Labour background goes to a grammar school and ends up an effing Tory. And of course, what the implications are is that the people are there to keep him in power. It's not that they should go to school and be taught and be full of knowledge so that they can make their own decisions, which is perhaps the way that you and I see things. Schools, let's make it a true educational establishment where people come at the beginning of the year and they don't know very much, and they end the year full of knowledge and full of ideas about how they can make the world a better place. Tony Crossland essentially revealed, that's in 66, whatever, 67, he says that. And then you think, okay, well, he's there for the perpetuation of his power. So the system's not designed, he's open about it. It's just, of course, from the 60s and 70s, PR comes in and you kind of hide what your views are about certain things. And so, of course, this idea is deeply seated. And one of the things that I've come to the conclusion as well is that the expert is also a huge issue in our country. Or at least in the Western world. I mean, if in the 1950s there would have been 2 economists in Whitehall, now there would be thousands of people who grew up with Keynesian views of economics, so they're certain that they're right, regardless of what the consequences of their policies are. But they're certain that theoretically they're right. And so that's the thing that brings us onto the big debate of this election. What's really obvious is that the uniparty, as you call it, is interested in open borders, right? And that anybody who says, well, hang on, we have laws in this country, and these laws are that you can't cross illegally. These people will say, well, they no longer get into the debate of things. They just throw opprobrium on the character who comes up with that point. They would just attack that person. And again, it has nothing to do with the people, the people who want open borders being charitable or being altruistic. No, it's that they are the tools of the implementers of economic theory, bluntly, on a country. That's what they're doing. They need population growth to keep the pound valuable. because otherwise the GDP to debt ratio goes through the floor, and eventually we end up with a bolivar, the Venezuelan currency. So they're not doing this, and they're not telling you this because they have your country, they have your best interest at heart, or mine, or because they care about the poorest in our country. They're doing this because they need to be paid in the civil service or in the large corporations that act mainly like bureaucracies, to be paid a currency that's worth something that you can pay and buy things with.
What do you, you've mentioned the COVID era, and more than by anything else, I think you and I have been brought together by a common sense of, a shared sense of disbelief about what unfolded during that period of time. And to me, to be invited now in the run-up to a general election to countenance the same people who oversaw that horror show, who choreographed, cheer-led and implemented the disaster of lockdown, of near-mandated experimental medical products and all of the rest of it, that without any hint of remorse or accountability or mea culpa, the same characters are inviting us to choose which of them should have power in the future. And to me, every single one of them, on account of how they behaved during the last 4 years, in a rational universe, they should walk away or be herded away from power, never to contemplate its application again. And for me, everything that's wrong in the system is laid bare and revealed by the fact that those people who did that are now saying, well, forget about all of that and give us more power.
Yeah, and it's the era of no consequences, where the powerful can do things with complete impunity, and when they're found out, or when they're found out, the only thing they do is walk away from the crime, as it were. But whilst they commit the crime, they attack you with all the power of the state for having the audacity of disagreeing with what they're saying. And this is one of the reasons for me that the COVID period was such an interesting period, because it revealed who my friends really were. I suddenly was talking to people that I thought were smart people, that read widely and everything else. And then I'd come towards them, and there was a big invisible wall on which I'd bump, and I'd say, but you're aware that this flu doesn't kill anyone, or you're aware that this flu was probably paid for by the US and other institutions, and that it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And then they'd look at me and they go, no, it came from a market where people eat bats, and and suddenly you go, but that's crazy. And there's an institute over there that looks at virology, and there's a market where people just buy fresh meat and veg. The likelihood is it comes from the institute that studies viruses, but it's not just that; it's everything.
To me, it doesn't. What it was. Whether it even was a novel virus from nature, made in a lab, or because of an unlikely one-night stand between a pangolin and a bat up an alleyway in Wuhan, whatever it was, wherever it came from, the fundamental truth that's being obfuscated and people are being invited to look the other way is that it wasn't dangerous in the way that it was sold to us. If you look at Germany, official German government figures, and let's imagine, we've all been raised to believe in, Teutonic efficiency. Let's believe those numbers are credible. There was hospital admissions in 2019 and 2020 in Germany were at a record low. Yeah. They saw nothing that they were clinically alarmed about, in all honesty, and any problems in terms of increasing numbers and spiking this and spiking that happened in 2021
Yeah.
in the aftermath of the application of all of the policies, the medical products, the lockdown and everything else. That's when the problems kicked in. So that whether COVID was real and wherever it came from, we were invited to be terrified of something that wasn't dangerous to the vast majority of the population. Average age of death was 83, however you cut it.
No, and also I think it's a good example for lots and lots of different topics that we could cover. I suspect we won't have the time, but being scared of something that's not dangerous is something for me that is a regular pattern. And I think the obvious one is climate change. And for me, the view is not to say that climate doesn't change, or it does change. We all know that it does. It's just that there is no need for alarm. And we can also agree that we pollute a lot less in certain fields now than we did 30 or 40 years ago. So we can be optimistic about the future. But clearly, for some people, having a paranoid people pays more than having an optimistic one. And in order to be optimistic, you need people to be free. Like me, when I was a kid, I didn't want to be controlled by the French state, telling me what I could and couldn't do, or constrained by the way that they believed in education. I wanted to be set free, and I wanted to take my own responsibilities and my own chances, whatever the cost might have been. And I think that this is a really, really important thing to hang on to as a pattern of conduct from the powerful against the average Joe on the street. What is it that people are trying to scare you about? Why are they doing what they're doing? Is there any evidence that the world is now on the verge of extinction, for instance, on the climate change side? And so I think if we can concentrate on the people are trying to scare you when something's not dangerous, and if we can keep unwrapping, using that pattern to try and judge some of the things that we see, I think we'll be in a better place.
Yes, the obsession with keeping people frightened, I find profoundly sinister. I genuinely, another revelation for me has been that those in power, rather than, I had made assumptions in the past that whether they were of the left or of the right or somewhere in the middle, that broadly speaking, the intention would be the well-being of myself and my family.
Yeah.
There would be an undercurrent of a determination to keep the wheels on the wagon, keep everything moving forward positively, and that my family's well-being would be part of that. And it was such a revelation to me to discover that the obverse was true. That there was an avowed intention
in Austria
to frighten people into compliance.
And in Austria, they took it a little bit further because, and that's where we met, actually, I remember, because I wrote this article in The Spectator because the Austrian government had decided to make it a criminal offense not to get vaccinated, which was going to either cost you 7,500 euros, which is actually, it's very high wherever you live in the world. And if you didn't pay, it would have been 8 weeks in prison. And the woman the woman who was minister for the constitution said, it is against the constitution, but we're going to pass the law anyway. And so there you had it. At least it was explicit in Austria that the constitution was worth nothing at all. But of course, France had a constitution which also was meaningless, and we don't have a constitution, but it was meaningless anyway. I'd have to say, and one of the great reasons why I still feel optimistic about the British people is that the mask mandate was only partially observed. And my son made that remark when he was traveling down the tube. He said, I love London because only half the people are wearing masks. Whereas in Germany and in Austria, everybody wore a mask. Now, I'll give you an example of how extreme things were. I live about half an hour away from skiing slopes in Salzburg. And during COVID, the resorts were closed, and then suddenly they opened for a little while, and you had to go on the lifts with your mask on, right? And so there was a bench for about 6 people. I'm sitting on the middle right, and on the extreme left, there's 2 people, 2 elderly guys, and I'm wearing a mask as we go through go up in the Alps. The sky is blue, the air is super fresh, the sun is shining, and there is no reason to wear a mask at all. I mean, it's the perfect moment to take your mask off and to breathe the fresh air. And so because I've got a big face, the mask slips off my ear, and it falls into the snow. And then this guy, suddenly I feel this pain in my shoulder. And I look towards him, and he climbed on top of his girlfriend, and he was hitting me with his fist on my shoulder, shouting in German that I should put my mask on. And I just thought, this is, obviously I'm a placid kind of guy, and I don't resort to violence very often, but I thought it's really dangerous to attack such a big guy in ski boots when we're stuck on the same lift. But that's how mad people became. It was, and so the people on the other side who completely bought into it have nowhere else to go but to move away from it. Like they've committed the crime, they threw the stones, and they just walk away because there's the guilt they must feel must be so deep that if they really looked at the man in the mirror, they would be devastated.
Yeah. I'm struggling to process that anyone under any circumstances would start punching a 6'8" tall stranger at the top of a mountain. I struggle to process the risk benefit analysis that didn't happen in that person's brain that embarked on that course of action. You said within your references to constitutions that we don't have one, which I believe I have. During the last few years, I have become preoccupied with the Constitution of Great Britain, and the fact that not only does it exist, that it is the fundamental defence, I believe, that we have against the tyranny that's being built against us.
Yeah,
the traditions of common law, yeah, of natural law. The Constitution, as it was made manifest in 1215 in Magna Carta, all of these things continue to prevail, despite the fact that the establishment, practically since 1215, has sought to persuade the population that they have no constitution and that in any event things have moved on, and now it's Parliament that's sovereign and all of the rest of it. I believe that our defence against the tyranny lies in as many people as possible remembering or learning for the first time that it is always and only the individual in our society that is sovereign, that my rights and freedoms end where yours begin, that I have that your rights as my rights are inviolable, untouchable, and that Parliament is not sovereign. It's the individual that's sovereign, and that elected administrators are in office, not in power, only to safeguard my freedom and your freedom. And in terms of the Constitution, which predates them and is out of their reach, they can do nothing lawfully to disregard or to alter that Constitution. That's the line for me. That's the hill I'll die on. The 1688 Bill of Rights is fundamental. So is the Magna Carta, and I mean that's part of the reasons why I'm a big lover of Great Britain. There's so much wealth, intellectual wealth, historical wealth. And of course, out of respect, I might have mentioned it before, but I am a patriot of every nation. I do believe that France has a great deal to offer, lots of lessons to be learned, and every country requires a PhD really to be fully understood.
That's the way that you act when you are humble and you seek to understand. When you love something, you try to get more out of them. When you hate something, you try to impose on it. What we saw in maybe 2019, when Boris Johnson was trying to prorogue Parliament, was a massive fundamental attack on the British Constitution. Lady Hell went to 1611, right, pre the Bill of Rights, to justify her view that Boris Johnson had acted unlawfully. And this struck me as being really important, because it meant that in the minds of a lot of people that we have in our country, things don't matter, words don't matter, timelines don't matter, history doesn't matter. And the reason for this is history requires, as I mentioned before, time to be understood, and that requires love in order for you to dedicate your time to understand, in this case, the Constitution, the country, how we grew from one thing to the other thing. But the people that we have in charge no longer see history as a source of love and understanding, or something to be discovered. They see it as an impediment to unrestricted power. That's my view, and I feel it increasingly, in particular with real great trepidation with the advent of centralized or central digital banking currencies, where suddenly we will be stripped of our anonymous right to be able to purchase the things we want to purchase when we want to purchase, and do with our hard-earned cash the things we want to do, without being told by a superior power when to spend it and how to spend
it. We could debate and argue all day and into the middle of next week about the sequence of events that that has within it, the Bill of Rights in 1688 and all of the rest of it. And I have so many questions and so many hackle-raising responses to so much of it. But since you raised the spectre of, well, central bank digital currencies, do you think, Alex's story, do you think that we, the people, have still the possibility of holding at bay, pushing back the purveyors of what I regard as the building of a digital gulag archipelago? They want to take away the freedom to speak. They want to take away the freedom to think. With CBDCs, as you say, they want to take away the freedom to transact, which sometimes I think might even be more fundamental than the freedom to speak. Yeah. If you can't buy and sell anonymously without the interference of the state, then your right to speak freely is almost, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but I have to be able to transact first and foremost. Yeah. Do you think that we still have it in us, as a patriot, as a lover of Constitution, as one who believes in the freedom of the individual? Are we going to hold them at bay, these bad actors, or not?
Well, so the answer is we can and we have to operate in a way with the belief that that's possible. And we mustn't stop just because it's a little bit difficult. And we also have to find the courage also to stand up to the bully. And the bully comes in all sorts of ways. We're seeing it at the moment with the advent of reform in the political space, where suddenly the machinery, the hounds of the establishment are being unleashed on Nigel Farage. The worst things are being said about this man just because he's challenging. He might win 10 to 15 seats. My view is that he'll probably get around 6 to 8 million votes. We're talking here about, obviously, the field of elections, and we know that there's a big disconnect between electing people and the way that the machinery of government goes, right? So we know that there is a split, but at least the elections gives us a sense of where people are in Britain. So it's still important, although it's not directly linked to political power. But you can see already what happens. What happens is that a target is found and it's destroyed by the state, and everything is sayable. Everything is expedient. You can bring the guy down mercilessly, regardless of whether in 2 or 3 years' time the guns will be turned on you as an individual. But I think I would say that it is our duty never to give in, to keep building the networks that we are, and to find the space and the time to educate as many people as we possibly can, whilst at the same time being educated ourselves. I try to spend a couple of hours a day reading a variety of books. I try to stay off the main media, and the reason for this is because I start to really appreciate and love reading books and looking at the sources and getting really deeply involved in some of the topics. And what I want to be able to do is to teach others what I've read. And I think that brings me a lot of life energy. And I think the same thing is true for you. And what we've got to try and work is from the bottom up. The bottom up is a lot more difficult because it's bitty, it's partial. But the point is that when we get some kind of momentum, then of course what happens is that you can bring some of the changes from below. And in the end, I think what we could aspire to is a Swiss type system where the politician and the bureaucracy is stripped of its power and must always go back to the people in the cantons, in the counties, and in the federal state to justify or to reaffirm a law, or at least to get a law out of the books. I mean, it is possible. It's a lot of work, but we've got to start doing it now. And we must always believe that the sun will shine at the end of the long night.
It's interesting. I've been involved over months, longer now. It's maybe over a year, in an ongoing conversation about direct democracy, the pros and the cons. And the Swiss system is routinely offered up as an example of how direct democracy might work and might be effective. But again, I fall back on the British Constitution as it was conjured into being, millennia ago, really, and the testing of the law was via the jury system, trial by jury.
Yeah.
In its original honest manifestation, the jury, 12 in England, 15 in Scotland, whatever, was empowered not just to consider the guilt or innocence of the accused that was brought before them, but perhaps most important of all, to judge the justice of the law itself. Mm. And it was in that almost sacred, that sacred duty of judging the justice of the law, that it was within that trial by jury system that the sovereign power of the people was made manifest. Because it meant that legislation, as it was coming down from above, came face to face with the power of the people.
Yeah.
Made manifest in that group of 12. And those 12 people relying only on their conscience, each one of them relying on his or her own conscience, was required to decide whether or not even the legislation was good enough.
Yeah.
And where it was judged to be not fit for purpose, it was rejected. It was nullified by that jury. And for me, that's a greater manifestation of the power of the people, even than direct democracy via the referendum. But in many ways, one of the worries that I have about referenda is if we'd had things like lockdown and mandated vaccines put to referendum here in Britain in the last 4 years, we'd have got them both. Yeah. The majority would have gone for lockdown and mandates.
No, I agree. Of it. I think the jury. So let's do a few things. You've got the jury of 12 judges the law and considers the case of the person on the stand. in the Conservative Party, theoretically, the membership decides who is going to be an MP and who is going to be the leader, right? In a democracy, the people vote. So, but actually, what happens in every single case is that the people, the experts in that particular field, take over and need the myth to be believed in order to keep power to themselves, right? That's so at every stage of the way, the story is always the same. The multitude have a right to speak, but actually we don't believe it, right? And in the case of the trial by jury, it's very similar in a way to the referendum. It's on a smaller scale, but of course it's in a court of law. But what we want to try and fight against, and what we want to try and do is work towards a decentralized social system where the center is defanged, and where every time the center tries to impose something, whether it's a law, whether it's a currency, whether it's a mandate, there are enough modules or nodules of resistance from below to say no. And the question is, how do we, as a decentralized universe, as a set of alliances, fight back against a very determined centralized power? So the fact that direct democracies are not perfect is I think is a fair point. But I do think that when I go to Switzerland, I feel that people are much more engaged into the politics of Switzerland than they are in Britain. And it's a question of degree, right? Can we make people more aware of the role they have to take, or they can take, to protect the country that they love and the culture that they've inherited?
Do you think? I'm always hopeful that these conversations can be or finally become optimistic. But with that in mind, I look at what has happened across Europe in the European elections, where in one country after another, populist, and I really resent the way in which the word populist has become a pejorative for those in power, but parties that give voice to the needs of the people in terms of family, the conservation of religion in Europe that has served us well for 2,000 years, secure borders, limits to centralized power. The parties saying those things are on the rise, and I think that's a very positive thing. And I think enthusiasm for Nigel Farage and the Reform Party is a manifestation here of the same instinct for the people here. And I wonder if as well, the way in which we did hold back in this country the idea of mandating experimental medical procedures, and we did push back against lockdowns and school closures and the rest of the madness that unfolded. So that, but via that long preamble, I suppose one of my last questions to you would be: are we on the cusp of change? Something profound, something paradigm shifting. Are we getting to the point where enough people are awakening and remembering what it means to be sovereign individuals with power?
Well, I think let's see it as a gathering of facts and data. Again, there's the arc of that story I was telling you about. My discovery that something was deeply wrong was in 2016. You kind of got to a certain place feeling similar around that same time. I think an increasing number of people are getting to the point where they know or they feel that the state's the enemy, and that the British state is at war with the British people, and that the French state is at war with the French people, and that the German state is at war with the German people. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to hide. And so the fact that we can exchange information, the fact that we can do all that, we can tell each other the stories of various of things happening in different countries, that does help. I think the thing that we cannot underestimate is the sheer power that the center has and will be willing to use in order to crush dissent. We mustn't forget where we come from and our traditions and our inheritance, certainly not in terms of the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights in Britain, and whatever it is that the French or the Germans hang on to. But we are marching from the top into a very similar system to the Chinese system. What the European Commission suffers from Beijing envy. It wants to emulate what the Chinese Communist Party is doing in terms of power and control. That also, that means that the power that they have at their disposal through the various arteries of money and budgeting and everything else, and the distribution of cash and largesse, all of that is in their power. What we can see though is that the gap between what we want and what they're doing is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The fact that Nigel Farage is on the cusp of getting, let's say, between 10 and 20 seats is in a way the beginning of what he calls a revolt. Is it the end of it? We have to hope not. But what we must be aware of is that the moment he gets to a position where he is in parliament, he will be attacked with all the might of the state. And this is going to be true of all of us if we take a position contrary to what the beast wants. And so, you know, we're on the cusp of a bigger battle, is what I'm saying.
For me, it's still a process that I'm struggling with and trying to make sense of. But I know that there's something essential and profound in the fact that the disparate cast of characters that have into whose orbit I have been drawn, you know, you included, and so many people from different backgrounds who followed their own individual paths, and yet I've ended up finding things in common with them. But at the same time, I cherish the fact that there are always aspects of what each of those individuals thinks and says that I don't agree with. Yeah. And I think that is not a problem. On the contrary, I think it's awakening to the idea that we are all individuals, and that all we need is some commonality. You know, we've all got divergent opinions about all sorts of things. The problem is that centralizing beast that wants to smooth everything out and say there's only one way to think about everything, and it's our way. Yeah.
And it's the least beautiful way as well. That's the, so I'll go through just a couple, but George Galloway, for instance, from 2016 onwards, I started thinking, I actually quite like George Galloway. You know, we don't agree on everything, but I like the way he speaks. I like what he stands for. There are a few things I might disagree, but it doesn't even matter. It's the fact that if there was a dinner and he came along, I'd be delighted to speak to him. Now, with what's happened in the US, my view of Noam Chomsky's completely changed as well. I now think, wow, America's been a bad actor for a long time across the world. And, yes. You know, it's one of these things you go, oh, thank God for that. I've noticed. And of course there's,
Yeah, do you know what? With George, George was my constituency MP in the 80s when I was a student in Hillhead in Glasgow. Yeah. You know, that's how long I've been aware of George. And for almost all of that time, I felt I had nothing in common with George Galloway. Yeah. But like you, and for about the same length of time, I thought, hang on. And do you know what it is? Basically, I know he believes what he says.
Yeah.
Exactly. He's not delivering some centralized script that's been generated based on polling and, you know, and people trying to work out what a majority of the electorate might want to hear somebody say today. Yeah. George Galloway, whether you agree with what he says or not, you know it's coming from here.
Yeah, no, but for me, that's such an important point. And this is one of the One of
we
the
can
things
have conversations if everyone's speaking honestly, whatever it is they think, as long as they speak from the heart and are similarly interested in what other people say from their heart, then that has an enormous generative force.
Yeah, of course.
For ideas.
And the greatest privilege is after a good conversation with somebody smart, introspection, when you go, I didn't know that at all. Let me study this and let me try and find out why I was wrong. But the interesting thing is that the way I would describe it is the world that we live in, as intellectually. Whether if you think that the human being is sanctified, if you believe that every human being has equal value in the eyes of the Creator, and I think that's really important, and that's perhaps. We don't have enough time today, but I think one of the reasons why we're shifting so fast away from the importance of the jury of 12 is because somebody has been pumping this idea that human beings are not sanctified, and therefore that there is a caste system, and the guys at the top are there because they're talented, they're experts, and the guys at the bottom deserve to be where they are. In other words, it's not the first shall be last and the last shall be first. It's the first shall remain first and the last shall remain last. That's the system towards which we're walking, or we're running towards. And that's, and as you say, the flat earthers who are in power at the moment are creating a humorless society. And as soon as they're challenged, we are conspiracy theorists because we don't believe what they're saying. But on my side of the fence, I will have really, really fun evenings with a lot of great people who all disagree with me, because we'll have a glass of wine, some beer, perhaps a cigarette or a cigar in the garden or whatever it is. We'll listen to some really good music, and we'll get to the end of the evening and we'll think that was really, really worth it. From their perspective, I keep thinking to myself, where is the love? Where's the life? Where do they get their life energy from? Is it from crushing the likes of us? I mean, for me, it's a grey world in which they live. So I don't even envy them.
Absolutely, Alex Story. Honestly, this is what I was aiming for. It's that opportunity just to come together and have those conversations with people whose paths we might not otherwise have crossed. And it's the conversations that are made possible by all of those differing opinions that make life worth living. As you say, here's to drinking beer and wine in the garden.
In that summer that never came or never comes, or at least late in coming. But it's been very cold over the last few weeks here, but there you go.
Yeah, but there's warmth in conversation. Alex Story, for now, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.